Thank you, President Banana. I am delighted, fellow Rotarians. Our speaker today, Jeff Reed, born in Indiana, raised in Ohio, third generation Bobcat, Ohio University, went down to Washington, worked for a group representing state legislators, the people in the legislature, back to Indiana for a foundation doing education research, went to work for Cummins Engine, a company that is driven in its decision-making and what it does by philosophy. Sounds a bit like Honda, also driven by philosophy, which made him comfortable when he came to Honda 7 years ago. In Honda R&D, responsible for its public relations, and then became 4.5 years ago head of government relations in the Midwest, explaining what it is Honda is doing and what it is striking. I grew up understanding the enormous change in manufacturing when the United States went into World War II. My father was part of that change. I got to see when I went up to Honda early on what it was doing here in Ohio. And we all think of the complex up in Marysville. But what it was also doing was establishing a tremendous supplier network. That was part of that 5-part strategy that Emily mentioned in introducing my assistant at the time, Sherry Morrow, who helped write that strategy one Saturday morning. And now Honda is undergoing, centered here in Ohio, the complete transformation of its business to battery electrics, being led by the associates here in Ohio at Marysville, at East Liberty, the new battery plant, the engine plant, and Honda R&D, all of those. And here to tell us about this tremendous transformation, one of the biggest manufacturing transformations, and all the companies are doing it, but for Honda, it is centered right here. We are the heart of it in Ohio. Jeff Reed.
Well, there's a reason I go by Jeff from Honda. So my name, Jeff Reed, if I say it fast enough, and I am a fast talker, my whole life I've been Jeffrey what? So you can imagine why I prefer to kind of move the last name aside in my introductions, plus because I'm so proud to work for Honda. I'm sure almost everyone in this room is familiar with the phrase standing on the shoulders of giants. And I share that because of how proud I am to be with you this morning. And it wouldn't be possible without giants like Scott, also John and Tom, who are in the room with us, Sherry online, and past Honda leaders, and thousands upon thousands of associates who made the story that Scott just described possible. And that story, and be able to share that with you over the years, is a great honor for Honda. We so value our partnership with the Rotary, and I'm truly grateful and honored to be able to continue that with you here today. I also subscribe to that statement, standing on the shoulders of giants, because my whole life, I have with confidence, believing it's accurate, told people that I'm 5'9.5". I even get that second, those few inches out of it. So you can imagine my surprise. This is a true story. You can imagine my surprise when I had my annual physical 2 weeks ago. They put the measurement on me and I come in at 5'7". I said, what happened to those 2.5 inches? So now I'm quite literally looking for giants everywhere I go so I can stand up. So it's been a few years since Honda has been with the Rotary, and a lot has happened. And I am not going to walk through all that history in great detail. You all are familiar with it, but there's one in particular to build off of what Scott shared that I want to start today's conversation with. And that is, if you can see the slides over here, 2 goals that our global CEO, Mr. Mive, announced in April of 2021. Very tall orders, if I shall say. In the spaces of the environment and in the space of safety. In the environment, Mr. Mibe announced our intention as a company to achieve zero carbon impact from our operations. The second, in safety, is to achieve zero traffic collision fatalities involving our motorcycles and our vehicles. Two very ambitious goals that we as a company are on a path to meet by the year 2050. Now, I know through past presentations to the Rotary, some of you are familiar with this photo and what transpired thereafter. In fact, there's an individual in this photo who actually spoke to the Columbus Rotary, Mr. Yoshida. I'm not going to go through all that history in the detail that past speakers have, but I do want to touch upon it because it does lay out just how important this shift is that Honda's going through and how the history that we have built in Ohio is so critical to that future. So on October 11th, 1977, our leader at the time, Kawashima-san, joined Governor Rose there to his right in the governor's office, announcing Honda's very first manufacturing investment in the United States with the establishment of a motorcycle plant up in Marysville, Ohio. Now, legend has it that when that first bike that you're seeing right there rolled off the manufacturing line, a fax came through from Japan that said, proceed with automobile production.
Wow.
We proved ourselves with the production of motorcycles, and we were thus given greater responsibility to further invest in America and further manufacture products for our customers. That has since transpired from that initial investment and that first product to our famous Marysville auto plant, right off of 33, which today is about a 4.4 million square foot facility with more than 4,000 associates working there with the capacity to produce almost 500,000 vehicles a year. Now, you can imagine my surprise when I joined Honda several years ago, because look, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I grew up in North Central Ohio in Norwalk. I was not familiar with Honda's presence here in Ohio. And when I told my dad that I was coming to work at Honda, my dad, who used to work in Marion, he said, "Oh yeah, I'm familiar with the plant out 33." And I said, "Dad, it's so much more." After that first investment to manufacture automotive products at Marysville, we unveiled what has since become Honda's largest engine plant in the world in Anna, Ohio, which can produce 1 million engines every year with about 3,000 associates working at around a 3 million square foot facility. You can see a theme developing here in terms of the size. 1989 in Logan County, East Liberty, we opened our auto plant with 3,000 associates. In 1996, also in Logan County, we dedicate the Honda transmission plant, which today can produce around 1 million transmissions and also 200,000 hybrid systems with more than 1,000 associates working there. And our newest manufacturing plant in Ohio, the Performance Manufacturing Center, right next to Marysville Auto Plant, with about 100 associates working in great detail on precision products with the Acura brand. With that plant opening up because of those associates having the responsibility to produce the second generation of the famous NSX supercar, which went on to win not just Motor Trend's Vehicle of the Year it came out, but also Green Car Journal's Green Car of the Year because of its hybrid technology. But that vehicle touches upon something that Scott also shared regarding Honda's presence in Ohio, not just the fact that we produce products here in the manufacturing line, but we also develop and research products here in Ohio at a 1,600 square foot facility in Marysville, just outside Marysville, Union County, where more than 1,000 associates are literally developing the vehicles that are to come in the future. So what associates do in this space is the sketches, the clay models, the dreams of products to come. They take those concepts, engineer those on computers in the virtual space, and start to create those initial products that will soon be developed and produced in our factories. So they get a sketch, they get a clay model, they engineer it online, and then the very first prototype of that vehicle is born at this facility, where we have a mini factory, if you will, a fabrication center, where they produce that first vehicle. And then upon production, we test it. We put it through all those tests, we validate it to get it to that level of quality and reliability that the Honda and Acura brands are known for. So what do? We freeze it, we heat it, we soak it, we crash it. We put it through all those tests to make sure that the specs and the assumptions that we had in the virtual space prove true in the real world. Once they do, again, those drawings, we then send to our factories to ultimately build. And we are constantly updating these facilities to make sure that the products we provide our customers are solving the challenges and the problems that they have in their lives. So last year, we dedicated a full-scale wind tunnel here in Ohio that is a best-in-class facility in the world. That is the first to combine aerodynamics, in which we can pinpoint where there are noise issues on a car while driving, aerodynamics in terms of how the body is sculpted and how that is affected while driving with airflow. And then Scott mentioned, I was born in Indiana. I'm a huge racing fan. We also can do racing testing there. It is the first such facility in the whole world to combine all three. And you can see here just an example of the scope of this facility. That gentleman standing under that fan is Mike Unger, who runs this space. I love this photo, not because it shows the scope of the environment, but also because, and it might be a little hard to see here, but I don't think he did this intentionally. Scott's attire actually perfectly matches the color of the space. He has the white shirt matching the white paint, the black pants matching the black fan. And because this was taken during the COVID era, his blue mask matches the blue turbine. Those facilities are how we produce such famous vehicles as the Honda Accord, made for 40 years in the state of Ohio, the Acura Integra in the top right-hand corner, which this year was recognized as the 2023 North American Car of the Year by a third party, the best-selling Honda vehicle, the CR-V and CR-V Hybrid, and then the flagship Acura model, the MDX SUV, not only built in Ohio, but among those four vehicles, also developed at that R&D facility I shared with you. All that sprung from this announcement in the governor's office on October 11th, 1977. But that's just Ohio. That announcement also led to tremendous growth for Honda across the United States, across all the product lines that so many, including myself for many years, did not know Honda specializes in. You, of course, have the Honda and Acura models I shared earlier, but you also have ATVs and side-by-sides in the power sports space. You have generators and lawnmowers and power equipment. You have marine outboard motors. And then our most recent product in that lineup, the Honda Jet and Honda Jet engine. So what started as a motorcycle has now reached the skies in terms of our mobility products. And that happens all across the country. This graph is somewhat intentionally busy just to show you the scope of Honda's operations across the country. So I shared with you what we do in Ohio, but next door in Indiana, we make the Honda Civic, which won the 2022 North American Car of the Year. In Georgia, we produce transmissions. In Alabama, we make the Honda Pilot, Passport, Odyssey, and Ridgeline. Those four vehicles that no doubt you see on the road, while made in Alabama, were born at that R&D facility here in Ohio. That's manufacturing. For R&D, we do high altitude testing for our powertrains in Colorado. We test our outboard marine motors in the the waters of Florida. We have part centers across the country in Oregon, Iowa, New Jersey, Honda Federal Credit Union in Texas, dealers in every single state that Honda now touches, not just because of that investment in Ohio in 1977, but also because of the headquarters that we launched in this country in 1959. So today, what does that represent? More than 30,000 associates across the country, a total capital investment of almost $24 billion. And through those dealerships, indirect jobs of 150,000 people across the country. In Ohio alone, all those facilities I walked through, R&D, manufacturing, parts centers, administrative operations, since that first announcement, today, 15,000 associates in Ohio, a combined payroll of more than $1 billion, and a total capital investment of more than $14 billion. That is the foundation that we are going to build upon with respect to these two goals that I shared at the outset. Zero carbon by 2050, zero traffic collision and fatalities by 2050. And once again, Ohio plays a key role in this future. So from a safety perspective, there's a whole host of ways that we can do this. One is through technology. The sensing technology that we can put on our vehicles to understand when crash scenarios might occur. You might be familiar with lane keep assist or collision mitigation braking. These are technologies that are on our vehicles now that help assist drivers to be more safe. But we also undertake educational activities. How can we work with teen drivers, for example, as they get their license to help become safer drivers in the process? We also support motorcycle education classes. I myself took it over in Troy, Ohio, to help reach those goals of zero traffic collision fatalities. Again, not just with our vehicles, but with our motorcycles as well. And then the engineering space that I described earlier from an R&D perspective, all the activities that we undertake, from the body structures that we design for how they absorb impact in a crash scenario, the testing that we do in our world-class safety center up in Union County, the third-party validation that we get from institutions such as IIHS, and also new technology that we develop in that lower right-hand corner, like an airbag that is specially designed to cradle the head in a different way to protect a driver in a crash scenario. I think we're all familiar when an airbag is released, what it looks like. Almost kind of looks like a pillow or a bubble. This airbag, developed here in Ohio, almost looks more like a catcher's net with a special netting on the front to better cradle the head in a crash scenario. That's the sort of activity that we're leading here in Ohio to reach those safety goals. And finally, a pilot project that we announced last year with the Ohio Department of Transportation for how the technology and the cameras and the GPS on our test vehicles can monitor roadways, gather information on potholes or cracks in the road, or perhaps paint that might not be as visible as it once was, to collect that data, anonymize that data, and send that data to departments of transportation for them to analyze to help them more efficiently treat those sorts of issues in the road. Not only helping them with their operations, but also, again, helping our customers to be safer drivers. That's in the space of safety. In the space of the environment, we are going to achieve that 2050 goal through what we call our triple action to zero approach. The three ways we're going to do that is the carbon neutrality of our products and our operations. So literally the plants that produce our products. We have historic recognition of energy efficiency in those operations by the EPA. But how do we go from energy efficiency to zero in terms of their impact? That's the sort of challenges we're looking at right now as a company. Also, clean energy. How do we use renewable energy to fund essentially our operations? And finally, resource circulation. When a product gets to end of life, how do we take 100% of what is in that product, recycle that to go into future products? That could be the material in the seats, the minerals in the battery, or the metals in the frame. Recycling all of that to go back into future Honda and Acura vehicles. On the product side of things, from a vehicle perspective, we are going to do that starting next year with the release of our very first battery electric vehicles that we have developed in partnership with General Motors using their Ultium battery platform in the form of two SUVs, the Honda Prologue, Prologue being a name as kind of a sign of things to come, and the Acura ZDX. You will see these vehicles on the road next year. This being the Prologue, this being the Acura ZDX. That will be our first entry point into the battery electric vehicle space. But in 2025, we are going to develop and produce battery electric vehicles through what we call our own e-architecture platform at Honda, solely developed and produced by us. And for that, the Ohio story comes back into play. Now, I shared with you at the outset, October 11th, 1977, our leadership joined the governor and team to announce our first investment, our first commitment to the state of Ohio. By a mini miracle and a lot of work and a few new gray hairs in my and my colleagues' heads, on October 11th, 2022, 45 years to the day, in the same location, we were able to partner with Governor DeWine, Lieutenant Governor Husted, Jobs Ohio, and our local communities to announce our recommitment to Ohio with a $700 million investment in three of those operations that I shared earlier, the Marysville Auto Plant, the East Liberty Auto Plant, and the Anna Engine Plant, to retool them for battery electric vehicle production, and a $3.5 billion commitment to Fayette County, Ohio, just southwest of here, in partnership with LG Energy Solution to develop our first ever battery cell manufacturing center that will employ 2,200 associates at this new facility. Those investments are going to create what we call our very first EV hub. This is our very first step as a company into the development and production of our own battery electric vehicles. So to walk you through the journey of what's going to happen here, at the battery plant in Fayette County, we will produce the cells and modules, modules being a collection of battery cells. The modules from Fayette County will travel up to our Marysville auto plant. At our Anna engine plant, which specializes in casting metal components now for engines, Anna will retool to cast cases that will encompass those modules. So the cases will travel from Anna to Marysville, where our associates will perform sub-assembly of combining those modules with the cases to create the battery packs. And then those packs will go in the vehicles that we produce at Marysville and that we produce at East Liberty. Honda's first EV hub, all that know-how, all that history that leaders like Scott, John, and Tom, Sherry, and others built for us over the past 45 years in manufacturing, in development, in procurement. That same know-how we will use as a foundation to start the production of battery electric vehicles here in Ohio, and then share that knowledge across all of our operations in North America. You can see here from the battery plant perspective, we unveiled a rendering of what that facility will look like. Again, that is in Fayette County, Ohio. And this is what they will produce, those battery cells. So we hear a lot in the news about the minerals that go into batteries. What are we talking about? Those minerals go into the cathode primarily. Cathode is separated by a component, and the cathode, science was not my strong suit. The cathode interacts with the anode to produce electricity through what looks like a pouch foil. And if we walk through the process of what's happening here, is essentially at this battery plant, you start with the electrode manufacturing, where you take the minerals and coat sheets, and then cut those sheets and eventually start stacking those to create that cell. Once you have all those elements, those cathodes and anodes stacked, you then inject that with an electrolyte to allow the chemical reaction process to take place, which ultimately produces the energy. And after that cell assembly, it goes through the formation process, where they are charged and discharged to start creating the energy within the cell to activate it. And then ultimately, those cells, again, become a collection, form that module that will go up to the Marysville Auto Plant. So if you look at this picture right here, that white box is an aerial of the plant in that process of mineral coating, cell assembly, cell formation in that module pack, basically moves left to right on that rectangle. That's the process in this production facility. That tiny green box up there in the left-hand corner, that's a football field. So that gives you a sense for the sort of size we will have at this facility to employ 2,200 associates. We broke ground on this facility in February of this year, joined by our global CEO, Mr. Mive, Governor DeWine, Lieutenant Governor Husted, and local leaders. In June of this year, we erected the very first steel. If you look in the background of that photo, that road is Route 71. So if you're going southwest of Columbus down to Cincinnati, right before the outlet mall, you will see the cranes building this facility. That was in June. This is now. We are almost halfway complete with this facility, with the intention to start production in 2025, trial production in 2024. So we've hit those first milestones. Our first hires will take place at this facility in the winter of 2024. And the sorts of associates that we will employ at this plant include engineers, technicians to run the equipment, and operators to essentially build those cells and modules that will come out of this facility. We have been sharing this story far and wide in the region with our community. We have hosted community barbecues to explain to our new neighbors what we will be doing at this plant. We have partnered very closely with the Lieutenant Governor, with other state and local agencies as it relates to training needs with respect to our future associates, and not just for us, but also for the industry at large in terms of what the new manufacturing space in the auto world is going to require. And then finally, in the space of education, going to high schools, going to career and tech centers, colleges and universities, where my colleagues can explain the manufacturing process much better than I, who again was a communications major at college. So that is the timeline for how we are going to get to our goal of 2050 carbon neutrality, with the methodical steps being in 2030, which is the farthest point on that graph, 2030, reaching 40% sales of EV products, by 2035, 80%, and then ultimately 100% by 2040. But I intentionally skipped over one piece of this chart, and that is an area where Honda has also been a leader, and that is hydrogen fuel cell technology. Or we also announced last year, and this is a continuation of our partnership with General Motors and the work we've done together in developing fuel cell technology, that performance manufacturing center where our associates specialize in the creation of the NSX, they will lead the production of a hydrogen fuel cell CRV at this facility, which will also go on sale in 2024. And that vehicle represents another dramatic change that Honda is helping to lead in the automotive space, and that is the realization of a hydrogen environment for how we can fuel not just future vehicles, but power generators that can be a backup power source, both for our operations and data centers, for example, hydrogen fuel cells that can go into trucking operations, and even construction equipment. That is another area where Honda Technology is helping to lead the future in terms of how we can provide cleaner, better technology for mobility products. And all of this, as I'm sure you are well aware of, seen in the news, requires infrastructure, whether it's a hydrogen vehicle or whether it's a battery electric vehicle that has to plug and charge. This new space requires infrastructure. And we have certainly seen leadership, like here in Ohio, for example, Ohio being the very first state to implement a plan for the build out of charging stations funded by the bipartisan infrastructure law. Governor DeWine was the first in the nation to unveil what that charging infrastructure will look like for a state. But companies themselves are also taking their own action for how we can build this infrastructure out. Honda joining 6 other of our auto partners in the announcement of a new company that will build out charging infrastructure across the country with the start of 30,000 stations. And also a partnership that we announced with BMW and Ford for how a customer can interact with infrastructure and use infrastructure at a time, say, when renewable energy is accessible, or give energy back to the grid through bidirectional charging and be incentivized to plug in when peak usage is perhaps not at peak? How can we incentivize customers to use the grid in those specific ways? Those are the ways, whether in the environment or in safety, that we are going to meet these ambitious 2050 goals. But the final piece that I'll mention in terms of how we're going to get there is probably the most important, and that's our associates. Annie Bow, there on the left, was the associate who proposed the full-scale wind tunnel to our leadership. Eric Heitkamp, next to her, was the associate who dreamed up that new airbag that I shared with you. Sue Bai is the associate leading that road monitoring pilot system with the Ohio Department of Transportation. Lamar and Rox, there on the right, are associates who started in procurement and the production floor respectively, now leading our operations in Alabama and Indiana. That's the Honda story. Associates taking initiative, working for others to deliver that better society that we all dream of. Scott knows this well. We pledge to be a company that society wants to exist. And I think the reason why for these years Honda has had such a valuable partnership with the Rotary is because these associates, like Scott, John, and Tom, and others, represent in everything they do service above self. So with that, I want to thank you, and I'd be happy to take any questions you might have. 5 minutes for questions. Yes, sir.
How in the world are you gonna hire 2,200 people?
So the question was, how in the world are we going to hire 2,200 people? So we selected Fayette County because we view it as a sweet spot for the availability of the future workforce there. That we can attract associates from the Columbus region, from Springfield, from Eastern Dayton, from Eastern Cincinnati, and even the Chillicothe region. It's a perfect central point to attract associates who want to come and have that good pay, great benefits, and lifelong career opportunity. And so we are partnering very closely again with the state in terms of how do we advertise and help schools, career and tech centers understand the opportunity that will be available at this plant, but also working very closely with our local communities and understanding what their goals are in terms of the build out of infrastructure that they can welcome new residents to their communities. So our comment, it's actually a major reason why we chose that location among many others was what we see as, again, that sweet spot to attract our future associates to want to work at this facility. Yes, sir.
All the car companies are shifting to electric and away from gas. Many people think our electric grid is at capacity. How are we going to add? I don't know what the numbers are of extra capacity needed for all of these cars to be plugged in at night. But does the United States have that much electricity to fuel tens of thousands of cars 10 years from now?
So the question is the grid ready to fuel or charge all of these vehicles that are to come, not just from us, but from other OEMs as well? Yeah. Because as was mentioned, basically all automakers are in on this electrified future. And so I'm not an expert, nor is my employer in the grid and utilities. But our auto association that represents all the major automakers does work with policymakers on a state and federal level to start to discuss and understand what does that future utility grid environment look like in terms of being prepared for this sort of future. The other thing I will say is that, and I myself am guilty of this sometimes, it's easy to look at a future state with a current lens on. And what I mean by that is technology is constantly changing, constantly. And a great example of that is both the partnership that we announced with Ford and BMW to rethink how we interact with the grid so that we're incentivizing customers not to plug in when grid usage is at peak, or through bidirectional charging if your vehicle, let's say, is at 100%, and you know you need 40% to get home, could you be incentivized to plug in and give 20% of energy back to the grid so that other people can use it at the same time? And also through research projects that we are leading with our university partners, how can we even rethink the time that it takes to charge vehicles that would subsequently take it off the grid faster? And so it's a valid question. It's one our association and we are constantly investigating, but we're taking methodical steps to address it. Yes, sir.
You're not an engineer, but I am, so I have two key questions. Say a few words about Honda's leadership, which is proven in the auto industry, motorcycles and auto, other kind of vehicles, to control battery fire, which is a big problem in the electric vehicle, and the perception among consumers that when you make a hydrogen vehicle, it has a tendency to go boom if it fails.
Yeah. So the question was, explain Honda's leadership in the engineering space as it relates to potential safety concerns with battery electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles. If I can take a step back for a second, and I think Scott and Tom and John, others will appreciate this from Honda's side. In the 1970s, when the U.S. Clean Air Act was unveiled by the federal government, the EPA called a bunch of OEMs onto a panel and said, why can't you meet these standards? They said, we can't, in terms of emission requirements without using the catalytic converter. And the EPA panel said, well, then how come this company, Honda, can't? And for us, and this gets into our philosophy that Scott mentioned, it's about quality, and whether it's in the space of motorcycles or vehicles or airplanes, how do we take that Honda philosophy of what we're known for, of identifying problems, proposing technology at a reasonable price so customers can actually access it and use it? How do we do that? And we've done that for years with different product lines. We will do that again with respect to EVs and fuel cell technologies. From a safety perspective, notably, we don't yet have any battery electric vehicles on the road for the timeline I shared earlier, that they'll start next year. So I can't necessarily speak to other OEMs, but what I can share with you is the area where Honda has always led in this space, like in hybrid vehicles, for example. We were the first among auto companies to put standards online for how third parties can address fire issues with hybrids, for example, but car crashes, how do we address that? And that would be the case with any vehicle that crashes. What are the best ways to address that from a safety perspective? And so Honda has always led in that space in terms of being open, partnering with our communities for how those sorts of challenges can be addressed. We have time for one more? Yes, sir.
How much of those batteries are you planning on recycling?
So great question. How many of those batteries do we plan on recycling? So a chart that I don't have shows a long kind of circular process of how we will obtain the minerals, how we will use the minerals in our products, but also how we will recycle the minerals with partners that we have announced publicly in terms of taking those products, again, reusing them and putting them into future products. So in terms of a specific percentage, we've not announced that yet, but we have been very public in terms of the partnerships that we are using. One of them is actually located here in Ohio for how they can look at these resources and repurpose them for the future. One more. Yes, sir.
Where does Honda stand in driverless car technology, and how does that mesh with your effort towards improved safety?
So where does Honda stand in the driverless technology? So there are 5 levels of autonomous driving, 5 being the instance where you completely can kind of disengage from the vehicle. Honda was the first OEM to have a level 3 vehicle on the road in Japan for the Honda Legend, in which the driver still has to be engaged, but in certain scenarios can utilize the driver assistive technology. And those 2 words at the end are the key from our perspective at Honda. We view the driver assistive technology, these sorts of autonomous vehicles, as a means of safety to support the driver in safety scenarios. And so Again, in instances with our lane keep assist, if you were to take your hands for a brief period off the wheel, you can maintain your driving in a particular lane, but the vehicle will actually alert you to put your hands back on the wheel. So for Honda, it's very much an assistive technology to support drivers. And notably, with respect to this autonomous future, one thing I want to note is it is not going to happen overnight. Even when you start to see vehicles with new advanced technology beyond them from a safety perspective, there's going to be vehicles on the roads for decades that don't have this sort of technology. And so when you think about something like the 33 Smart Mobility Corridor, which is a stretch of highway from Dublin up to the Transportation Research Center that we partnered with the Ohio Department of Transportation, State of Ohio on to do research for how can vehicles with our connected vehicle technology and our products interact with vehicles that don't have this technology. Honda was a leader in that research to understand, as we evolve into this space, how do we make sure safety on the road for everyone, which is our goal. Because again, it's that 100% zero traffic collision fatalities involving our motorcycles and our vehicles. And so for Honda autonomous technology, it is a safety assistive technology for our drivers and customers. And thank you very much. And I'll
Jeff from Honda, we can sit here and listen to you all